The train slowed under a sky swollen with heat and rain. Inside the boxcars, German women pressed their faces against wooden slats, breath shallow, hearts pounding. They were ready for violence. They had been trained to expect it. On the platform below, Black American soldiers stood in perfect formation. Rifles resting, faces calm, silent. No one moved. No one spoke. In that moment, everything these women believed about America, race, and war began to fracture. 3 weeks earlier, the journey had begun outside Cherbourg, France. 200 German women stood behind wire fencing. Nurses, teachers, factory workers, clerks, a violinist from Hamburg. Among them was Greta Hoffmann, 32, a Red Cross nurse who had treated wounded German soldiers across Europe. Her armband was still visible beneath dust and exhaustion. They expected execution. Nazi propaganda promised it. Instead, they were searched, medically examined, deloused, and issued plain gray dresses marked with black letters. PW. Prisoner of war. The Atlantic crossing was worse than fear. Darkness, vomit, rolling steel decks. Women whispered prayers into sleepless nights, clutching photographs of children they feared they would never see again. Greta wrote in a hidden diary. March 12, 1945. We are told we are going to America. I cannot imagine what America will do to us. When the ship docked in New Orleans, the heat struck like a living thing. Wet, heavy, crushing. Palm trees swayed beneath a blue sky that felt unreal. And again, black soldiers. This was the first shock. In Germany, black people existed only as propaganda. Caricatures, warnings, proof that democracy meant decay. Posters showed guerrillas in American uniforms. Films claimed black soldiers raped and murdered across Europe. But here they stood, disciplined, professional, silent. One soldier steadied an elderly woman who stumbled on the gangplank. His touch was gentle. Greta felt something inside her crack. The trucks moved north through Louisiana. Swamps, bayous, moss-draped trees, water everywhere. A landscape alive and unfamiliar. The guards spoke little. But when the heat became unbearable, they passed water. When a woman nearly collapsed, the convoy stopped. Cruelty would have confirmed everything they believed. Kindness did not. The camp appeared from the pine woods. Clean wooden barracks, simple fences, board guards in towers. Nothing like the camps of Europe. The commander was a black captain, Robert Hayes. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention, he said calmly. You will work. You will be paid. You will be fed. You will not be harmed. The women stared in disbelief. The barracks were plain but clean. Beds, fans, radios playing American jazz. This is how they break you, one woman whispered. With comfort. But the punishment never came. Morning brought roll call and breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast, butter, coffee with cream. Women froze, afraid to touch it. One began to cry. A black soldier mimed eating and smiled slightly. They ate like people remembering what it meant to be human. Work followed, 8 hours, breaks, water, no shouting. No beatings. And everywhere black soldiers. They laughed, played baseball, sang while working. One carved wooden toys during breaks. Greta befriended one, Sergeant James Wilson, a wounded veteran from Georgia. Quiet, observant. What did they tell you about us? He asked one evening. That you were dangerous, Greta admitted. Not fully human. Wilson nodded. Yeah, we know. He had fought for a country that denied him basic rights. Fought for freedom while segregation ruled at home. And yet, Greta said, you do not harm us. That's the difference, he replied. That night she wrote, we were lied to about everything. The change came slowly. Baseball lessons, shared books, photographs from liberated camps. Bergen-Belsen. Bodies stacked like firewood. We didn't know, the women whispered. Some had known. Some had chosen not to. Guilt settled heavy and suffocating. The guards never lectured. Their dignity did the work. One night, a violent storm tore through the camp. Thunder like artillery. Rain flooding the barracks. Guards carried blankets and coffee through the downpour. Greta, shaking, asked Wilson why he cared. "Because somebody has to stop the cycle," he said. "Somebody has to choose different." She cried, not from fear, but from understanding. In July, black soldiers formed a jazz band. The music filled the camp, joyful, aching, alive. Women cried without knowing why. They had been taught this music was degenerate. It was beautiful. In August, the war ended. Captain Hayes addressed the camp. "When you go home," he said, "tell the truth. Tell them black soldiers guarded you and did not harm you. Tell them hate only leads to graves." Repatriation came in autumn. There were no ceremonies, just quiet goodbyes. Years later, Greta became a teacher. She taught the truth. Lisa Muller moved to America. Her children played with black neighbors. Sergeant Wilson became a civil rights activist. The camp disappeared. But what happened there mattered. They expected monsters. They found men. And in that space between expectation and reality, something rare happened. People changed. The women did not leave Camp Concordia unchanged. That became clear almost immediately after repatriation began. Back in Germany, rubble replaced streets. Hunger replaced certainty. And old beliefs tried to return quietly, disguised as nostalgia. Some neighbors whispered that the prisoners had been softened by the enemy, poisoned by American lies. Others demanded silence. Forget the past. Move on. But the women who had stood under Louisiana pines could not forget. Greta Hoffman returned to Hamburg and saw the same justifications she once used spoken aloud by others. "We didn't know. We had no choice. It wasn't our concern." This time she spoke. She told them about black soldiers who guarded her without hatred. About eating better as a prisoner than Germans ate at home. About jazz music played by men the Reich had called subhuman. Some laughed. Some shouted. Some walked away. But some listened. And listening was enough to begin change. In classrooms, kitchens, and church halls, these women repeated the same uncomfortable truth. The world they had believed in was built on lies, and they had seen proof with their own eyes. Not lectures. Not re-education films. Human experience. That was what broke the spell. Years passed. America changed slowly. Germany changed painfully. And the memory of Camp Concordia faded from public record. But it lived on in small, quiet ways. In children taught to question slogans. In families that rejected racial myths. In letters kept folded for decades. Sergeant James Wilson never considered himself a hero. He told his students that guarding prisoners taught him something too, that power could be exercised without cruelty, and that dignity was a choice made daily. When civil rights marches filled southern streets years later, he carried those lessons with him. Captain Robert Hayes never gave speeches about the camp. But when asked what victory looked like, he answered simply, "When the enemy leaves believing lies less than when they arrived." And somewhere in Germany, former prisoners told their grandchildren a story that sounded impossible. That during the worst war in history, the people they were taught to fear most showed them humanity. Not all lessons change the world at once. Some change one person, then another, then a generation. And that is how real victories are won, quietly, imperfectly, one conscience at a time. History often remembers wars through explosions, generals, and flags. But the real turning points rarely look like victory. They look like a soldier offering water instead of cruelty. Like music played for people who were taught to hate its creator. Like dignity shown when revenge would have been easier. The German women who arrived in Louisiana expected monsters. They found restraint. They expected humiliation. They found humanity. And that discovery destroyed something far more powerful than an army. It destroyed belief. Belief in racial hierarchy. Belief in propaganda. Belief that cruelty was strength. No bomb could have done that. When they returned to a broken Germany, these women carried more than memories. They carried evidence. Proof that people they were taught were less than human had shown them what being human actually meant. Not speeches. Not slogans. Behavior. And that is why what happened in camps like Concordia mattered. Not because it was perfect. America was not perfect. Racism still ruled much of its society. But in that contradiction lived a truth impossible to ignore. A nation that failed its own citizens still chose not to dehumanize its enemies. Black soldiers who were denied rights at home still upheld dignity abroad. That choice echoed long after the fences came down. It echoed in classrooms where history was told honestly, in children raised without inherited hatred, in quiet refusals to repeat old lies. The camp disappeared. The uniforms faded. The witnesses grew old. But the lesson remains. Hate survives on distance and lies. It collapses when faced with proximity and truth. The most dangerous moment for an ideology is not defeat on the battlefield. It is when its followers are treated better than it ever treated others. That is how lies end. Not with fire, but with exposure. And sometimes the most powerful victory is not conquering an enemy, but refusing to become them.